Hey everyone. So, welcome to this final video in this email classifier series, where what we're going to do now is we're going to build a simple web app using Streamlit in Python, right? And what are we going to, or why are we building that app? So, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be an email sorter, right? Where you can enter in your email and you can see the app actually classified, right, into the different categories. And also, you have a sidebar that tells you what the different kinds of emails are. So, the reason we're building this is in the previous videos in this series, we have understood the nitty-gritty, the details of how neural networks work and how they can be used for classification. And then what we've done is built this neural network that allows us to classify emails. In the previous video, we kind of built it and trained it using, and we put all the code we'd written in the videos before that into a library called DeepRoots, which is on GitHub. It's open source. So, and we used that to build and train this neural network model, and we found that it was working fairly well. And so now what we're going to do is just to make things fun, kind of, take, this neural network, but now build a simple interface and plug the network into that. And we'll see how we can do that so that when you enter this email and hit add email, it actually goes, runs the network, and then classifies it, right? As you can see here, and kind of gives you that email list, right? And then we'll see how we'll give you ideas so how you can extend it, right? Make it more practical, like linking it to an email API and so. Good. And so how are we going to do that? Well, as I mentioned, we're going to use Streamlit, right? So Streamlit is a really powerful Python framework that allows you to build web apps in Python. So let's quickly go take a look at the Streamlit website just so you can get started and you can see how to install Streamlit. And then I'm going to be using VS Code as my, IDE or editor. And so you can pick one that works for you, but I'll be using VS Code. And so, um, and I'll add a link in the description and in the notes on the website on how you can get started with VS Code as well. Okay, so let's first go take a look at Streamlit. To get started with Streamlit, what you can do is just go to streamlit.io, as you can see here, and then you can see this is where you'll end up. And Streamlit is a really powerful platform that allows you to build web apps, but with Python, right? So it's basically like writing Python code, as you can see here, and we'll go kind of use this. So if you hit the click start, the get started button, what you can do is see how that works. You can see how you can install. So if I hit get started, you can say pip install Streamlit, and then you can get started with that. It's an open source framework, so you can go check it out on GitHub as well, right? And so you should have kind of pip installed on your machine if you're using Python mostly, and so that should really help you get started fairly quickly. Okay, and then we'll start scripting this, so we'll see how this goes. And then I'll be using an IDE. I'm using VS Code, so if you can go to code.visualstudio.com, or you can kind of search for it online. You can find code editor, and so you can download it if you want, and getting set up is super easy. So you can read the instructions on how to get set up here. The docs are very, very useful, so you can hit get started and it'll get you started, right? So how do you open it, how do you open a folder, and so on, right? I'm not going to spend too much time because this video is going to be fairly long after this. So this should get you started. If you still have trouble with this, let me know and I can share links to how to get this set up. Okay, so let's open VS Code and get started with Streamlit. Okay, so let's get started coding up this app. So I've created a folder called Streamlit app, and then in that what I've done is created a file called email classifier app.py. So that's what I've opened now in VS Code, which is what I'm using as my editor. What I also have, as you can see, there is a file called email_classifier.json. Now what this is the neural network, right? So in the previous video, what we did is create and train the neural network in Python using the code we had written previously, and we've converted that into a GitHub repository called DeepRoots, and we've used that to train the network. I've just exported that network in JSON format, right? Which is very simple to do, and I'll show you later how to do that. But assume for now that you have the email classifier.json, and what we'll do is now use that neural network and quickly build an app, right, that then takes the input you give it, which ideally is an email or a message, and it will classify it into spam or otherwise. So let's start by first importing Streamlit. So Streamlit as st, right? And sometimes the autocorrect just complicates things. And what I've done here is opened up a browser as well. So when we run this, right, you've got Streamlit installed, as we've kind of discussed before. And so as we run this, you can then start seeing how it works. So I'm going to say st.title. What that does is create a title to this web page or web app. Now the whole idea here is to make it possible for you to write apps in Python very quickly, right? Web apps. So once I've done that, I've opened up the terminal, I've gone Streamlit run and the name of the app, right? And I've said run, and as you can see, it's opened up localhost 8501, and what it's done is created that as the title. So it's as simple as that. You write a command here using st, using the different components or widgets as it's called, and they show up. Title will create the title to the page. Let's now use another simple command that's actually very powerful in Streamlit, which is write. So you can actually write a lot of things. You can write text, you can write variables, you can write data frames. So write is a very powerful statement, a command in Streamlit. And so I'm just going to say it's like a subheading, but instead of using subheading, I'm just using write. So you kind of see that statement. Now the moment I've written this, you see here Streamlit has detected that the file has been changed. And so it's saying file has been changed, rerun, always rerun. So I'm going to hit always rerun, right? And so you see the update. Now what Streamlit's doing is it's monitoring your code, and each time you make a change, it's going to rerun the app. How it does that is by rerunning the code from top to bottom. The same thing also happens when you, for example, add a button here or add a form or something, and when you click or make a change there, the entire app is rerun, right? And so certain things you will need to keep in mind that we'll go over to make sure that, for example, your data does not kind of get rewritten, right? Okay, so we've got the title and a simple piece of text. What do we need next? So as we've seen in the kind of in the slides what we were going to build, what you need now is a simple form. So let's create a simple form where we can input our email. Right now what we're doing is saying we're going to type out our email or copy paste our email, and then this app will classify it for you. So I'm going to call it the task form, or rather instead of calling it a task, let's just say the email, right? Instead of saying the task is to classify the email, let's just say email form. And so I'm going to say, what do we need? We're going to say, well, so it's as simple as writing a variable in Python. You're saying description is equal to, and instead of saying and writing the text down, we're saying actually it's a widget. It's the text area, right? So in forms, if you're familiar with how it works in JavaScript, you can have one line text, you can have text area, which is what we're losing. And then when you say help, it's kind of what's going to help when you visualize the component, a prompt that you get. So let's just look at this. Okay, so you see that. So this is the the title there, and you see this, and this question mark is the help. So when you click that, it'll say email, right? And it's not email you, it's enter your email text. Now what is it saying here? It's saying the submit button is not there, right? Why does it say that? Well, you've got a form and you're saying with st.form, and it's a block. So the idea being that it's going to look for a submit button, and all this code that you write as part of this form is part of this block. And without a submit button, as it says here, the interactions will not be written. So what do? Well, you create another variable. So if you're familiar with Python, then how do you do that? Simple, like we did with description. You say submit is equal to, and now st dot, and you could say st dot button, which is a typical button, but because this is a form, you would say form submit button, right? And you say add email. Let's save it, and it reruns, and now you have a form where you can add an email. So let's look at an example. Let's just now this email is not going to be sent anywhere, but let me just type in an email. So I'm going to say congrats, you have received rupees 10,000 as the first prize of our contest. So you can start thinking whether this is spam or not, right? But okay, I've written that. Now nothing's happened obviously because I haven't done anything. I haven't sent the email anywhere. I haven't, it's just being submitted. But submitted where is the $1 million question. So what do we need to do? We need to know where this email is going to be stored, right? So what are we going to do? Well, let's just first figure out what we're going to do with that. Let's say if submit. So what it does is it checks if submit has been clicked. And so if you've not clicked, then submit is false, right? We can actually just print that and see what happens. So if I say print submit, is it expecting something? Okay, it's below that, right? So for a moment, let me just comment this out. Okay, so it says false here. You can see print submit. When I click submit, it says true, right? Now how does it say that? It's checking the state, right? And when I've clicked it, it's realizing that submit is now a value. Let me do something interesting as well. Let me just say print preform, right? Just to show you something. Preform. And say that. So you say, so it says preform and then false. When I hit add email, what does it do? It says preform again and true. So what it's done is when you've hit the button, it's gone and rerun the app. Only now it's figured out that submit has been clicked. So each time you're doing this, it's actually rerunning each of these lines of code, right? Which is why I've written this preform here, right? So you realize that Streamlit's rerunning your app each time you hit a button, you make a change and so on. Why is that important? We'll find out, right? Okay, so what am I going to do next? I'm going to say, well, if submit, right, what do you want to do? Well, we want to store that email, right? But right now, as we've seen, there's no state. So the email is stored in description. So we're going to say first if description dot strip. I'm just taking out any white spaces before or after. And I'm creating an object, right? And I'm going to have a few pieces to the puzzle there. I'm going to say it's going to have a description item. It's going to have category, which is what our class or classifier is going to do. And I'm going to say, right, uncategorized. So it's, as of now, there's no classification. Then what we can do is add the date, right, which obviously for now is just the date you enter the email. So it's date.today.strftime, because I just want the date and I want it in this format, right? So I want y. Okay, and this is okay. So we've got the date, and then what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to add a small variable called vector. Why? Because for the email classifier to work, you need a vector embedding, right? Okay. So let's do something. Let's just print email. And when I say print, it's not going to show up, by the way, here, right? This is, you need a Streamlit, right, for it to show up here. So I can actually, print is just, you're going to see it in the terminal, right? Okay, so let me enter this email again, add email. It says date. Oh, I have to import date, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say import, or rather from date time, import date, right? Okay. Let's rerun this. And okay, so description, congrats, you have received 10,000 rupees as first prize. Category is uncategorized. And the date is today's date. And you have a vector, right? Okay. So we still haven't saved our email, right? We've just taken the email that would be in the text box and then kind of converted it into a simple object. Okay. So what's the next step of the puzzle? The next step is to save this. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's define a data frame, right? Let's keep it simple. Let's just create a list actually. And so we can say, I have a list. I'm going to say emails, and I'm going to say it's an empty list. And then I'm going to say here, emails.append, right? And that should be it. Now tell me if this will work or not. Just think about it for a second. And do you think this will work? If so, why? If not, why? Right? And what we'll do is I'm going to take this out, but I'm actually going to do here, not here. At the end of that, st.write emails. Okay, so st.write, as we've seen, should write the emails to the screen. So you have our first kind of email saying congrats, so and so. We still have that. Now it shows here, it's written this, it's an empty list. I say add email. Okay, so it's written congrats, you have received rupees 10,000 as the first prize. Okay, very good, right? So it's written that, and it's part of this vector, only we are just displaying it, as this, in this simple object format. We've not made it a table, right? But let me do something else. Let me add a second email now. So let's say, okay, the meeting, and we've not classified this, right? For 9 a.m. and let's say add email. So now what happens? So you see that it should actually have become the second object, right? We've already got the first object, the first email should be the second one, but that's been overwritten. Why is that happening? Because each time I'm hitting the button, Streamlit's rerunning. So emails is being here set to empty, and then it's going here, it's creating the email, and it's washing out the old one, right? But if I don't set it to empty here, then what happens? Well, we have a problem. How do we initialize the email, right? So what do you do about this? Because Streamlit's going to keep rewriting your variables, rerunning the script. So that's where a very interesting thing happens. You have what is called the state variables in Streamlit. So you have what are called the state variables, or the state, the app state. And so what we can do is say, I'm just going to say if emails not in st.session state. And so st.session state, a Streamlit session state, is the state of the app, and or rather a variable, and that variable, even when the app kind of reruns and so it's refreshed effectively, this variable kind of stays in memory, right? And so you'll see what I mean by that. I'm going to say st.session state dot emails is equal to this. So now what it's going to do is, obviously this emails does not exist, but I'm going to say here st dot state dot emails dot append email, right? And here as well, I'm going to just ask it to write the session state, right? So what you're going to see now, I'm going to say the meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. That's written. Let's go back to our first message. Congrats, you have won rupees 10,000 in our lucky draw. And what happens to that? It's added. Why is that? Streamlit's still rerunning, but what it's done is the session state, right, is getting updated, right? You could say, well, what if this, but that doesn't matter, right? So the session state is kind of maintained as you keep making changes to the app, keep hitting buttons. And so any variable that you want to persist, you need to use session state to store. Of course, you have a database, you can keep loading from your database and stuff, but if you want to keep something in memory here, maintain the state of the app, basically use session state. Okay, so we've seen how to do that. Now what do we have here? We have a very messy depiction of our object. Let's clean that up. Let's make it a data frame. Okay, so how do we do that? So I'm going to take this st.write out, and I'm going to say, actually, let's make an email table. So we're going to say if st.sessions state dot emails, and let's first just convert it into a emails, right? And then what can we do? Let's say st dot write, right? And you can say here are your emails, right? And then what do? It's very simple. Say st dot, and you can say st dot write. Let's try that and see what happens, right? And I haven't imported pandas, so I'm going to have to do that. Okay. And import pandas as PD. Okay. All right, we're good. And so you see what has happened now. All of a sudden, it's become a nice, clean table. Right? Simple. Now, what do we do next? So we're seeing the description. We're seeing the category. It's not that's not categorized. We've got the date and we've got the vector. So now what are we here for? We are here to categorize the email, right? Of course, the index is from 0 to 1. We'll clean up the table later. So let's just bear with me on that. But the important part now, we've got a table, we've got the form, we need it categorized. So what are we going to do? Well, let's create a function now. So let's say there is a function that is categorize email. So I'm going to go and create it up above this. So I'm just writing a small separator here. And I'm going to say, okay, so what do we need? We have a function called categorize email, right? And what it takes in is the email, right? Which is this object, right? Okay. So what do we need to do? Well, first we need to convert the email into its embedding. Then we need to run it through the neural network. And then we need to store the category. So I'm just going to first take out the description. So I'm going to say email, and we were storing that in description. What's next? Next we need the embedding model. So how do we do that? Well, we know how to do that. We've seen that quite a bit in this series. I'm going to say from sentence Now, if you've not seen the previous videos in the series, Sentence Transformers is a library, right, that Hugging Face provides, and that makes it very easy to take text and convert it into a vector embedding. So in our case, our description, use Sentence Transformer and we get a vector embedding. And given we've trained on a particular embedding model, we need to use the same embedding model. So we've trained on the Sentence Transformer paraphrased mini LM2. And so we need to use the same one. So I'm going to say, let's create it above embedding model is equal to this, right? Which is what we've used in to train a neural network. And so what will happen? Well, you have the email coming in. We've got the description out. Now what are we going to do? We're going to say, well, embeddings is equal to embedding model dot encode, which is what it uses. This is pretty much what we've used in the previous video as well, right? Where we were creating the neural network or training the neural network. So we've got that. So we've got the embedding, right? And what we're going to do is, we haven't trained or we haven't evaluated the model, but where does this go? Well, if you say email, we created an item called vector or a component called vector in that dictionary or in that object. And so we're going to say email vector is embeddings. And we're not classifying it yet. So I'm just going to say category. Let's keep it simple. We haven't classified it. So category is classified. We were calling it unclassified, call it classified, and we say email and we had category. So this email is what is passed in, right? Just and what do you do? Right? That's it. So I want to return this email, right? And so first thing I want to do is categorize the email. So I'm going to say categorize. Have I called it categorize email, and I'm going to call it, and that's the email. Let's just get back the email, and now I updated the session state, so I'm just going to return, and that is that. So let's just reset our session state. So I'm going to refresh the app, and let's clear it, and now let's enter the first email. You have ₹10,000. Now it's taking a little bit of time because embedding model has to be set up, and it's saying EMBE. I've added a 30, so I'm just gonna, okay, so we're good. Let's try that again. Okay, and it's got the vector embedding. It says classified. So as you can see, we've got this large vector embedding, which it's not showing. Thank God, it's not showing the whole thing, and it says classified. Enter a second email. You have a meeting 10 a.m. tomorrow. Now again, it's taking time. Why is it taking time? Because it's going in, it's loading the embedding model again, which is a bit time consuming, and then it's doing all of this, right? Okay. And so it's classified, it's got a vector embedding for that. So now that we've got our vector embedding, we need to load our neural network. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we've trained it using DeepRoots. So I'm going to say import DeepRoots. I'm going to assume you have that installed as well based on our previous video, right, where we trained our network using that. So it's just the repository on GitHub. You can just go check out the first part of that video early on where we've shown you where it is on GitHub. You can just, you know, do a git clone and then go into that repository, do a pip install -e dot. That'll install the repository locally, and then, right, once you have DeepRoots, what we can do is load the model, right? Okay. So the model is NN scalar, which is what we've set up. So what you have to do is go deeproots.nn, import NN scalar, which is basically the neural network, but scalar means it's taking, you know, it's not vectorized, basically, the neural network, which is what we've built through the series, right? Okay. And so what I'm going to do here now is say classifier model, right? Classifier model is equal to, our classifier model is equal to NN scalar, right? So it just creates an empty net, there's nothing, and then I'm going to say classifier model dot import, right? And I'm going to give it the network, which we can see here is the email classifier.json. What that does is take the neural network we've exported and then load it here, right? Okay. So how did we export this model? So at the end of this video, I'll show you that, right? I don't want to break the flow here. At the end of the video, I'll show you how you can kind of go back to the Jupyter notebook we created the last time and export it out of DeepRoots, right? But for now, just assume the file will be there, so you can go check it out, and you can go import it. Okay. And so what do we do next? We say we have the embeddings model, we have imported NN scalar in the form of a classifier model. So this is our neural network. Right. And so I've got the embeddings. Now I'm going to say logits is equal to classifier model dot forward. Right. So that's the forward pass of the neural network, and I'm just going to wrap the embeddings in a NumPy array just to make sure it's the right format. And so that will give you the logits, right? If you remember, it was 2 layers. It was there was a linear layer, 50 by 384 by 6, and the second one by 50, and the next one was 50 by 6. And we hadn't attached the softmax, so what we've exported does not have the softmax, but it doesn't matter, right? All you need is just the max. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write the softmax here. So I'm going to say probability is equal to np.exp, right, logits by np.sum np.exp. Now if you actually go to DeepRoots and import in the DeepRoots library, there is a function called softmax. You can use that as well. I've just written it straight away. But actually what we care about is the output or the category. And so the category is, right, is np.argmax probability, right, which is the maximum. But now it's just going to give us a number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say, well, let's create a list of categories, right? And so I'm just going to copy paste this quickly, save time. I'm going to create a list of categories, right? So email categories, and it's this: spam, social, work, marketing, important, and personal, in that order. So when it gives you a number, it's in that order because that's the order in which we had set up the one-hot encoding and trained the network. So categories is that, and so I'm going to say, well, once it finds np.argmax, will find the index of the largest probability, and then categories will take that index and give you the corresponding class. So we can take this classified out, and that is that. So what it should do now is you send it the email, it takes the description out, first generates the vector embedding. So I can write that here, embedding from text. Then what it does is neural network forward pass, then probabilities with softmax, and then getting the category. Now I've written the probability here just so that if you want, you can visualize that in this table. I won't, but you can visualize the probability that it's classified it, so you kind of get an understanding of that. Ideally, you can just ignore that and just do np.argmax logits as well, right? Okay. So now let's run this. So let me just refresh the state of the app so that I don't have any more emails. And now let's try something. So let's try the win a free iPhone 14 by clicking on this link. Say add email. It's going to take a second because it's got to rerun the entire file, load the embedding model, and so on. And I haven't imported NumPy. So let's just say import NumPy or NumPy as np. Any other imports I have missed? Hopefully not. Let's just rerun this. And it says spam. So if you can see here, win a free iPhone, it says spam. I've used this because it was one of our data points in the training set. So it's taken a vector embedding, it's got the date, and it said it's spam. So that's that, right? How does it know it's spam? It's using a classified, it's using a trained model. So what you can do is take an initial random set of weights in that format, just open up DeepRoots, just initialize the network and try it again, and it probably might not work very well. So let's try another interesting email. I'm taking a few from our training and test set, but then we can type out a few more. Okay, meeting rescheduled to 3 p.m. confirm your place. So this is a serious email. Let's rerun this. And what happens? It classifies at work. So it is our trained neural network, right? Because if you use the untrained one, you can see that it doesn't classify it as spam or work or anything like that. It probably gives you fairly incorrect predictions. Let's try something interesting as well, different. Okay, so let's try something with Instagram. Okay, let's try, and this is a variation. Your Instagram post received 5,000 views. And let's run that. This is more like a message or an email title. It says social. Awesome. So our email classifier now has been loaded and the neural network is running. So effectively we're done, right? We've got this thing and this is running. But let's take care of another thing. So you can see that each time I hit click, it takes a little longer. You see the app stalling a bit. The reason being that each time it's rerunning the app, as I said, right? And so we've used state variables to cache the state. What we can also do is use cache, and that will speed up the loading. So if there's, for example, we don't want to initialize the embedding model each time because it takes a little time initializing the embedding model. And so Streamlit has this really cool feature that allows you to cache, right, resources or models. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to say let's say def, and so it's you can cache functions basically. So I'm going to create a function called load embedding model, right, and doesn't take in anything. What it does is return sentence transformers, right? And then here I'm going to call this function, right? So effectively it's the same thing. It should not make a difference. So right, let me just try another email. So I just copy paste one from our training set, I guess, and I'm gonna run it again. It's running. It's taking a fraction of time, and then it's got work. Good. So it's classified it correctly. Now what if so it's not been cached, right? So it's rerunning the script each time because these are in state, you see them, right? But otherwise they would have been gone. So now if I say @st.cache resource, right, what it's done is cached this resource, meaning it's stored that in cache, and so when it gets here, it just takes that back out of cache. It doesn't rewrote this. So let's take another email. So this one's a marketing email, right? And I'm just copy pasting that, right? And I say add email, and it's done, right? It's taking a fraction of a second actually in this case, because the first time it's loading it. So it's the first time it was caching it. So as you've seen, it's taken a fraction of a second. But now let's add one more. So it's an important email about your health insurance, right? Okay. And so now this one should hopefully run quicker. Yeah, there, already done, right? Let's try another one. Are you free for a quick call? And done. So the first time, as you saw when we were running it, it took a fraction of a second and it showed a message that said caching. But now that it's cached the resource, it doesn't have to run sentence transform, which clearly was where the delay was coming in. So now as I'm adding emails, it's just showing up very quickly. If you want, you can cache this as well. What that will do again is, what the cache also does is it looks for inputs that are the same. And if the inputs are the same, then it will not rerun the function, it will just cache it. And so for example, if you give it the same email again, exactly the same email with exactly the same pieces, it'll speed it up again because it will not have to run your neural network. So that is where cache is coming. Good. So we've got an app that works quite well. You can give it messages, emails, and I'd suggest you try different types of emails. Try slightly longer ones as well, but it's working very quickly. We can enter emails very quickly and see the answers. Let's try something interesting here again. Marketing flash sale. Okay, let's try that, and there it goes. It's already classified it in a fraction of a second, right? And you also have the vector embedding that we have done. Let me do one last small thing because we are also kind of getting you started with Streamlit. So we've covered a lot of different concepts. We've seen how you can create these these widgets for title and text. We've created a form, and in the form, as you can see, when you say width, then it looks at the form. You can add different types of text. This is just one I've added. You can add more. You need the submit button, which is created using this. When that is hit, it checks for the submit and then runs the function. Here what I'm doing is running the categorize email, which is going, so it's taking the email, writing it in this object form, going here and categorizing it and updating it to session state. And we have seen that if you just keep a variable each time you run Streamlit, what happens? It refreshes or reruns the app, so your variables are lost. So using session state, ensures that your information is saved across runs, right? And then we've taken that, created a data frame, and visualized it using st.write again. You can also use, so Streamlit has a data frame, st.dataframe. You can use that as well, but for now I think this is good enough. I'll show you one more feature of Streamlit which is very interesting. What we'll do is we'll create a sidebar. So again, with st.sidebar, right? And what I'm going to do in the sidebar is I'm going to just store the statistics, right, of the email. So how many emails and what each email is. So I'm going to say email statistics. What the markdown does is allows you to use the markdown language. And then what we'll do is say it's going to count. So we want to make sure that there are emails, and so it's going to say if len, right, st.session state dot emails, right, is greater than 0, meaning if there are emails, right, then what is it going to do? It's going to first get it into each category. So I'm going to again df Now there might be a more efficient way to write this, but for now you can bear with me, and then you can go around and make this even better, and I'd encourage that. But you can just say df category dot value counts, right? And then what we can do is, so what that's going to do is for each category here, we've got this label called category. So for each category, it's going to count the different types. So how many spam, how many work, how many social, and so on, right? It's going to basically, we've already classified it, find how many types of each there are, and that's what, and pandas is great at that, right? Pandas allows you to really get great functionality out of data frames. And then I'm going to say st.metric, right? And emails. I could also just use st.write, but I'm just trying out a different command here actually. Session state email. So it's giving me the number of emails. You could make it a variable, but Streamlit's going to rerun it anyway. I mean, we could again make it session state, but yeah, right. And so the advantage of Markdown is it allows us to format things very well. Right, and so that's, I've used this kind of just to make it simple. But for category in categories, which we have here, if you remember, we've created the different categories. So for each of these, what are we going to do? We're going to say count is category counts, which we have done here, right? And so here it has gone in, and each of these, it's found the category, it's found how many there are, right? We're going to get that count, right, which is how you do that. This is how you do that, and then say st.metric. We're going to print category and count, right? And of course, if we've written an if there, so we're going to say else st.write. Oops, no emails yet. Very good. So let's hit rerun again. And now what we have is we've got this. I've got a spelling mistake here. Okay. So it has to rerun again. But what it's done, we've got 8 emails here going from 0 to 7. You could change this index. But it's got a sidebar that says 8 emails, and it's broken it down into categories. So there's 1 spam, there's 1 social, there's 3 work emails, so busy person, 2 marketing emails, 1 important email, and no personal email. So let's do something. Let's find a personal email. let's create one and let's say, okay, so personal email, this is one from our data set, say add, it's called personal, and personal has become one. Outstanding, right? So we've made the app a little more interesting. And if you hit cross, the sidebar goes away, we're back to our table. If you hit that, your sidebar is there as well. Great, so you've got the basic idea. We've kind of taken the email classifier we've built and we've just had some fun with it. We've basically made it a simple app. Now, a lot of different things you can do to extend this. So I'm leaving that as assignments, I guess, for you. One is we've got a vector embedding, and there's a reason I left that here. When you classify it, there's a vector embedding, right? What you can do now is add a search bar here, and you can search by category, which is fairly straightforward, right? You just have to filter this by category. But what you can do is actually, you've got the feature here, which is vector embedding, to do contextual search. So if you add a search bar here, and then it takes the email, so add a function here called, and I'm not going to do the function, but I'm going to write it out to get you started. Search email, right? Contextual, and you enter the email, and what it's going to do is you're going to use the embedding model. So again, right, I'm just going to assume you're entering text, right? What it's going to do is, instead of taking in the full email, take email text, and I'm going to leave this here, right? So your job now is, what you could do is vector search, right? Which is an interesting assignment. Now we've covered vector databases in a different course, so you can go check that out, but that's an interesting application or extension. The other thing you can do is, I've got a form here where I'm entering or copy pasting each email. Well, ideally, you can link this to your email, right? Google Drive or so on with an API, and keep updating it. And because we're using cache, it loads pretty quickly, right? So you can, as you get your emails, you can then kind of see the emails here and classify it using this approach. And of course, because you know now how to train a neural network from this series, you can pick your type of, categories, retrain, and you can classify the model, but you also have the ability to bring in vector search. So good. So hopefully you've started seeing how now, you can bring in a neural network and kind of embed it into a simple app like this. Now, the neural network we built was fairly straightforward, simple, easy to import into an app directly. If you have a much bigger neural network, so let's say you write, a billion parameter neural network. It's pretty much a version of GPT or something like that. Then what you'd probably want to do is host it separately, use fast API or something like that to kind of keep your neural network going separately. And instead of embedding it here directly like we've done an N scaler here and we've embedded it here, what you would want to do is actually make it an API call to that. So host it separately, run separately. But for simple networks like what we have, you saw it's blazingly quick, right? It works really well. Good, so we've got the basic idea. One last piece of the puzzle, which is not related to Streamlit. I'm going to give you the email classifier.json file, right, where I post this app, and I'll give you the link to that. It'll be on the Pixagon GitHub repository, right? But what we'll also do quickly is see how you can export, using DeepRoots. In the previous video where we trained our network, we didn't export the model. We just stopped at how it works. So I'll just quickly open up that Jupyter notebook where DeepRoots is set up, and I'll just show you how to export it. It's as simple as this import model. Well, if you go there, you just do export model, but I'll just show you that in a second if you haven't tried that, or if just so that you're clear on how to do that as well. But otherwise, we've kind of really understood how it works with Streamlit, right? Okay, so let's do that quickly and then we'll get back to the slides. We've seen how to build the app in Streamlit, but if you're wondering where we got the neural network from, in the video previously, we've trained the email classifier, and what we've done, this is just the Jupyter notebook from that. So we have this library that we've put up over, using the different pieces of code we've written in this series. It's called DeepRoots, right? It's on GitHub. And so in the previous video, I've shown you where you can find it and so on. I'll add the link here as well. But basically, we've imported the different functions from DeepRoots, and what we've used is a neural network called NN scalar, which basically means it's not been vectorized, right? It's just layers consisting of neurons. Typically in Python, if you're using production runs, you'd have a vectorized network. So in the previous video, we'd gone through this where we loaded the weight data, set up the network, trained it, using gradient descent. We'd run 10,000 iterations and we'd seen the convergence. We'd evaluated it on a test set. We'd seen, the different errors and so on. Now, what we need once you run this, and you can check out the previous video where we do this in detail, is a way to export this, right? And how we do that is quite simple. We use a simple command. We just say network, or net in this case, dot export model, and we give it a name, email classifier dot JSON, which is what we have done. So if we run that, it'll go and export that model, and you can see that it's actually printing as well what we've exported in this case. What it will do is export that into a JSON file, right? And what that email classifier.json does is basically it's going to write the number of layers. So it's going to write the number of layers, and then for each layer, it's going to write the type of neuron, the number of inputs coming in, so the number of neurons in that layer, the number of inputs to each neuron, the activation function, and then the weights and the bias. And then it's going to take the, and the name of the layer. So in this case, it was layer 1, and then layer 2, and the same thing, and so on. And then when we, as we did in the Jupyter notebook, if we say net.import model, then it'll load that a neural network. So in case you were wondering where we got that network from, this is how we did that. Okay, so let's quickly get back to the notes and wrap up this session. Okay, so through this series, in this video, we learned how, you can kind of build a quick fun Python app with Streamlit. But then in this series, the idea was to give you an understanding or an introduction to neural networks. And we focused on the classification problem, right? So we basically kind of learned both the theory and how to quickly kind of put together a network like this, right? And we used, given the fact that we used it as an email classifier, we also understood as a side, how you can take an email and convert it into a vector embedding. But the goal was to give you an understanding of what a neural network is, how its neurons work, how you can assemble it, how you can train it, what the loss function is, how you can train this network. And so we covered in the last few videos all these topics. Like I said, we looked at the one-hot embedding, and then finally we concluded this series by having some fun by converting it into an app with Streamlit, right? Now, obviously, there are quite a few more topics that are slightly more advanced that will give you, more understanding of neural networks. We haven't covered those in this series. This is more of an introductory series. But we do have videos on some of these topics as well, of courses, and some will be coming up, that you can check out later. So how you vectorize your network. So in this case, we kind of built a neuron, then assemble that into layers, and then kind of use that as a neural network. So it's effectively a scalar neural network. We also didn't use batch mode. We were feeding in our data points one after the other. However, if you're looking at production apps or building applications, and you're using platforms like PyTorch, then you need to know how to vectorize your neural network, which is basically going to be using matrix vector operations. So that's a topic that, and I'll add links to these topics. So you can go check them out, and on the platform as well as courses. How AutoGrad works, and we have covered this in a previous course, so you can go check that out. How gradient descent works and what the variants are. And so we have, kind of covered how gradient descent works in a previous course. We'll have a course on more advanced optimization topics for those of you who are interested. So we'll cover that. And then, of course, we've focused on classification. Regression is a simpler problem in general, simply because neural networks, you just change the loss function and you change the activation functions if you want, and it works. So if you've understood how classification works, which can be slightly trickier sometimes, regression should be fine. It's also an example that we have posted previously, so you can check that out. And of course, Now, if you're interested in more advanced topics, so we're looking at convolutional neural networks, which primarily are used to build image models. And then, of course, there's recurrent neural networks for time series data, and then, of course, that forms the basics of language models. And then, of course, transformers, which power the most powerful language models today, like GPT and so on. These are advanced topics that hopefully this series will give you a foundation to go start reading about, the technical aspects, the papers, and so on. And then we'll have courses where you can understand these in more detail, right? So we'll cover each of these in a fair bit of detail. Okay, so hopefully you found this course useful. Both the theory and the coding exercises. See you in the next one.